At 2:47 in the morning on February 28, 2026, before a single Iranian naval commander had received an order, before a single fast attack boat had started its engine, before the regular Iranian Navy understood that a war had begun, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy ceased to exist as a fighting force. Not degraded, not damaged, gone. The IRGC Navy was the first target of Operation Epic Fury. Not the nuclear facilities, not the ballistic missile sites, not the air defense network. The IRGC Navy. The force that had been threatening American carriers in the Persian Gulf for 30 years, the force built specifically to swarm and overwhelm American surface ships in the confined waters of the Strait, was eliminated in the opening minutes of the conflict before it could execute a single element of the doctrine it had spent 3 decades developing. This was not an accident. It was the opening move of a targeting sequence that American planners had been refining for years. And understanding why the IRGC Navy went first tells you more about how the United States actually plans to fight its next major war than anything that happened in the hours and days that followed. To understand why the IRGC Navy was the priority target, you need to understand what it actually was and how it differed from the regular Iranian Navy. Iran has 2 separate naval forces. The Islamic Republic of Iran Navy, the IRIN, is the conventional force. It operates the larger surface combatants, the Moj-class frigates like the Iris Dana, the older destroyers and corvettes, the submarines. It is organized along conventional military lines with a traditional chain of command, standard naval doctrine, and a mission set focused on blue water operations and conventional naval warfare. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy is something entirely different. It was created after the revolution specifically as a parallel force loyal to the ideological principles of the revolution rather than to the conventional military structure. It operates in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Its doctrine is not conventional naval warfare. Its doctrine is asymmetric warfare, swarming, harassment, and the ability to threaten vastly superior conventional forces through numbers, speed, and the willingness to absorb losses that a conventional force would find unacceptable. The IRGC Navy operates hundreds of small fast attack boats and speedboats. It operates armed unmanned surface vessels. It operates shore-based anti-ship missile batteries specifically positioned to cover the approaches to the Strait of Hormuz. It operates drone launching platforms including the Shahid Bagheri, the converted vessel that Iranian commanders believed would be their most significant asymmetric asset against carrier strike groups. The IRGC Navy is not designed to sink aircraft carriers in a conventional sense. It is designed to complicate, harass, attrit, and potentially overwhelm the defensive systems of carrier strike groups through simultaneous attacks from multiple directions using assets so cheap and so numerous that shooting them all down is economically unsustainable. The exchange math is the fundamental weapon. Force the carrier strike group to expend $4 million missiles to destroy $20,000 boats, and eventually the math breaks the defender regardless of tactical outcome. This doctrine, refined over 30 years of study and exercise, was what American planners had to neutralize in the opening minutes of Epic Fury before it could be executed. The targeting sequence for the IRGC Navy had been built over years. American intelligence had developed a comprehensive picture of IRGC Navy infrastructure long before Epic Fury began. The fast attack boat pens at Bandar Abbas, at Bushehr, at the smaller bases along the Iranian side of the Gulf, the Shahid Bagheri drone carrier and its home pier, the shore-based missile battery positions covering the northern approaches to the Strait, the command and control nodes that would coordinate a swarm attack, the fuel storage facilities that would sustain operations, the maintenance facilities that kept the boats running. Every one of these targets had been assigned to a specific weapon in the opening strike package. The timing was designed around a single operational requirement. All of these targets had to be struck simultaneously before the IRGC Navy received orders to disperse and execute its attack doctrine. Dispersal is the key word. The IRGC Navy's survival doctrine, in the event of an American strike, was to disperse its small boats into the Gulf and the coastal inlets before they could be destroyed at their bases. A fast attack boat moving at 40 knots in the open water is significantly harder to target than a fast attack boat sitting at a pier. A drone boat that is already launched from its carrier is significantly more dangerous than a drone carrier sitting at dock. The American targeting sequence was designed to hit everything before the dispersal order could be executed. This required knowing where everything was, having weapons assigned to every target, and executing all strikes within a window measured in minutes, not hours. The time-on-target coordination that destroyed Iran's surface fleet later in the conflict was first developed and practiced for exactly this scenario. The opening strike against the IRGC Navy was the original time-on-target problem that the entire operational concept was built around. The Shahid Bagheri deserves specific attention because it represented Iran's most serious attempt to develop an asymmetric counter to American carrier air power, and because its destruction in the opening minutes of the conflict was one of the most significant single-targeting achievements of epic fury. The Shahid Bagheri was a converted commercial vessel, approximately 240 meters in length, modified to serve as a drone carrier and forward operating base for IRGC Navy operations. It was not an aircraft carrier in any conventional sense. It did not have a flight deck capable of handling fixed-wing aircraft. What it had was the capacity to carry, launch, and support large numbers of Shahed series loitering munitions and armed drones, providing the IRGC Navy with a mobile drone launching platform that could position itself anywhere in the Gulf or the Gulf of Oman. Iranian commanders had invested significant resources in the Shahid Bagheri, specifically because they believed it addressed the range limitation of shore-based drone operations. A drone launched from the Iranian coastline has a fixed range determined by its fuel capacity and its launch location. A drone carrier that can reposition itself in the Gulf extends the threat envelope significantly and complicates American targeting because it is a moving platform rather than a fixed installation. American planners had been tracking the Shahid Bagheri for years. Its capabilities were assessed. Its operating patterns were studied. Its home pier at Bandar Abbas was identified and assigned to a specific weapon in the opening strike package. The Shahid Bagheri was at pier on the morning of February 28th. It never left. 2 precision-guided munitions destroyed it before its drone systems were activated, before its crew had received orders to depart, before it had launched a single drone against a single American vessel. The most sophisticated asymmetric asset Iran had built specifically to threaten American carriers was destroyed before it fired its first weapon. This single targeting achievement significantly reduced the drone threat that the carrier strike groups faced throughout the remainder of the conflict. There is a deeper lesson in the IRGC Navy's destruction that goes beyond the specific tactical achievements of the opening strikes. The IRGC Navy was built around a doctrine that assumed it would have time to execute. The swarm attack concept requires getting boats into the water and into attack formation. The drone carrier concept requires getting the carrier away from its pier and into a launch position. The shore-based missile concept requires the batteries to be active and tracking before the first American aircraft appear. All of these assumptions were wrong, not because American intelligence had perfect knowledge of every asset, but because the time-on-target strike concept was specifically designed to eliminate the time window that IRGC Navy doctrine required. This is the fundamental lesson of the opening strikes. The IRGC Navy spent 30 years building a doctrine that was tactically sound if executed from a standing start with adequate warning. American planners spent the same 30 years building a strike concept designed to eliminate the warning that the doctrine required. The IRGC Navy doctrine assumed a reactive American response, that the United States would wait for Iranian provocation, absorb the initial attack, and then respond. the Hormuz swarming scenario, the tanker harassment scenario, the fast attack boat harassment of carrier groups. All of these were designed around an American military that was responding rather than initiating. Epic Fury was not a response. It was an initiation. And a doctrine built around defeating a reactive adversary has no answer for a preemptive strike that arrives before the doctrine can be executed. The boats were at their piers. The Shahid Bagheri was at its pier. The commanders were asleep or just waking up. And then the first weapons arrived. The regular Iranian Navy, the IRIN, watched what happened to the IRGC Navy in the opening minutes of Epic Fury and drew the obvious conclusion. Its own assets were not safe either. The Iris Dina had already departed east, which is why it survived long enough to be killed by the USS Charlotte 4 days later. The other major Iran surface combatants that were not immediately destroyed in the opening strikes either attempted to disperse, unsuccessfully in most cases, or remained in port and were struck on subsequent strike packages. The IRIN did not coordinate a response with the surviving IRGC Navy elements. The command and control disruption caused by the opening strikes, combined with the speed of the follow-on strikes, prevented any organized combined arms response. Iran had two navies. One was eliminated in the opening minutes, the other was eliminated in the following 72 hours. The combined Iranian naval force that had been built over 30 years, that had been cited in threat assessments and naval war games as one of the most serious asymmetric challenges the United States Navy faced, ceased to exist as an organized fighting force before the first full day of the conflict ended. The IRGC Navy went first because it was the most dangerous, because its swarm doctrine, if executed, was the scenario American planners most feared, because eliminating it in the opening minutes was the prerequisite for everything that followed. It went first, it went completely, and it never got to execute the doctrine it had spent 30 years preparing. That is not a coincidence. That is a plan. The destruction of the IRGC Navy in the opening minutes of Epic Fury has a specific implication for how other regional powers with asymmetric naval doctrines now have to think about their own survival. The IRGC Navy model, large numbers of cheap, fast, armed vessels designed to swarm and overwhelm conventional naval defenses, has been studied and partially replicated by several other military forces. North Korea operates hundreds of fast attack boats in the Yellow Sea and the Korea Strait. Russia has invested in similar asymmetric naval concepts in the Black Sea and the Baltic. Non-state actors affiliated with Iran, including Houthi forces in Yemen, have demonstrated the ability to threaten commercial and naval shipping with combinations of armed drones and waterborne improvised explosive devices. All of these forces just watched what happened to the organization that invented the doctrine they are replicating. The lesson is not that the doctrine is wrong in every scenario. Against a reactive adversary, against a naval force that is not prepared to execute a preemptive elimination strike, a swarm doctrine can still be highly effective. The Houthi campaign in the Red Sea demonstrated that even a relatively unsophisticated version of the doctrine could impose significant costs on commercial shipping and naval patrol forces. The lesson is more specific. Against an adversary that has complete intelligence on your infrastructure, has pre-built targeting packages for every asset, and is prepared to execute a time-on-target strike that arrives before you can execute your dispersal plan, the swarm doctrine has no defense. The IRGC Navy had all the boats. It had the doctrine. It had 3 decades of practice. It had the Shahid Bagheri. It had the shore-based missiles. It had everything it needed to execute the scenario that had kept American naval planners awake for 30 years. What it did not have was warning, and without warning, the doctrine was irrelevant. Every military planner operating an asymmetric naval force now has to ask the same question. How much warning do we actually have? And what happens to our doctrine if the answer is none? For the IRGC Navy on February 28, 2026, the answer was none. The piers are empty now. The boats are gone. The Shahid Bagheri is on the bottom of the harbor. The doctrine that built them is not gone. Somewhere, military planners are studying what happened and asking how to rebuild it in a way that survives the first 15 minutes. That work has already started. It will take years. And the American planners who eliminated the IRGC Navy in those first minutes are already building the targeting packages for whatever comes next. To fully appreciate the scale of what was destroyed in the opening minutes, the specific assets of the IRGC Navy deserve to be enumerated. At the time of Epic Fury, the IRGC Navy operated an estimated 1,500 to 2,000 small vessels of various types. This number includes everything from armed speedboats capable of carrying rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns, to more sophisticated fast attack craft armed with anti-ship missiles, to unmanned surface vessels carrying explosive payloads, to the specialized vessels designed to lay mines in the strait. The most capable fast attack craft in the IRGC inventory were the PACAP and Tier-class vessels, capable of speeds exceeding 50 knots and armed with C-704 anti-ship missiles with a range of approximately 35 kilometers. In a coordinated swarm attack, these vessels could potentially saturate the close-in defensive systems of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer by approaching from multiple vectors simultaneously at high speed, presenting more simultaneous targets than the ship's weapon systems could engage before some of them reached effective weapons release range. This was the nightmare scenario. Not one PACOP, not 10, 30, 40. Coming from multiple directions simultaneously, each one presenting a targeting problem that demands an expensive interceptor or a close-range defensive weapon response, while others continue closing the distance. American naval planners had wargamed this scenario extensively. The results were not uniformly favorable to the American side, particularly in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf where maneuvering room is limited and the ranges are short enough that warning time is compressed. The answer to the swarm problem was not to find a better defense against the swarm. The answer was to destroy the swarm before it launched. That is what happened on February 28th. Not all 1,500 to 2,000 vessels were destroyed in the opening strikes. Many were destroyed in follow-on strikes over the subsequent 72 hours. Some escaped into coastal inlets and were hunted down over the following days. A small number remain unaccounted for. But the organized, coordinated swarm attack that the IRGC Navy doctrine required, the simultaneous launch of hundreds of vessels from multiple bases in a coordinated assault on the carrier strike groups, never happened. Because the bases were gone before the launch order could be executed. The swarm that American planners feared for 30 years never left the pier. The human cost of the IRGC Navy's destruction is rarely discussed in the strategic analysis of Epic Fury, but it belongs in any honest accounting of what happened. The IRGC Navy was not composed of robots and autonomous systems. It was composed of men. Iranian sailors and soldiers who had joined the Revolutionary Guard for various reasons: ideology, economic necessity, family tradition, career prospects, and who were manning the fast attack boats and the shore installations and the Shahid Bagheri when the opening strikes arrived. CENTCOM did not release Iranian casualty figures. Iran did not release them publicly. Independent estimates based on the scale of the destruction and the manning levels of the targeted facilities suggest that the IRGC Navy lost a significant number of personnel in the opening strikes and in the follow-on operations over the subsequent 72 hours. The exact number will likely not be known publicly for years, if ever. These were not senior commanders making strategic decisions. They were the sailors and boat crews and base personnel who were the human layer beneath the doctrine and the assets that the strategic analysis focuses on. The targeting packages that American planners built over years listed facilities and vessels, not individuals. But when those facilities and vessels were struck, individuals died. This reality does not change the strategic assessment of Epic Fury. But it is worth acknowledging that the numbers in the battle damage assessments, X vessels destroyed, Y facilities struck, represent a human cost that the strategic language of military analysis tends to elide. The IRGC Navy, that spent 30 years preparing its swarm doctrine, never executed that doctrine. The men who trained to execute it paid the price for the doctrine's failure, not its execution. The IRGC Navy's destruction also had significant implications for the broader Iranian economy and society that extended beyond the purely military dimension. The IRGC is not just a military organization. It is an economic conglomerate that controls significant portions of the Iranian economy, including construction, telecommunications, energy, and manufacturing. The IRGC Navy, as part of this broader organization, had economic activities and business interests that extended far beyond its military functions. The destruction of IRGC Navy infrastructure represented not just a military loss, but a blow to the economic networks that the Revolutionary Guard had built around its naval operations. The boat building and maintenance facilities that were struck had civilian contract workers and supply chains. The logistics infrastructure that supported IRGC Navy operations was intertwined with the civilian port operations of Bandar, Abbas, and other Gulf ports. The economic ripples from the IRGC Navy's destruction will take years to fully trace. But they add another dimension to the strategic consequences of epic fury that extends beyond the immediate military outcome. The IRGC built its naval force over 30 years. It embedded that force in the economic and social fabric of the regions where it operated. The destruction of the military force left gaps in those economic and social fabrics that will take years to fill. Iran is left with the task of rebuilding not just a military capability, but an economic and institutional infrastructure that was built around that capability. That is the full cost of what happened on February 28th. It is larger than the number of boats destroyed. It is larger than the number of facilities struck. It is a generation of institutional development that was erased in a single night, and that will take another generation to rebuild, if Iran chooses to rebuild it in the same form, which after what happened to the original is far from certain.